Greetings, everyone. Welcome to Design is Hard, the state of learning to design and code. My name is Jeremy Osborn. I'm the academic director of Aquent Gymnasium. You can find us at thegymnasium.com. What do we do? Gymnasium offers free online courses on topics such as web design and front-end development, user experience, and much, much more. This webinar is the latest in our series of discussions with notable figures in the industry. Today I'm joined by two esteemed gentlemen who fit that bill, Jeffrey Zeldman and Aaron Gustafson. First up, we have Jeffrey Zeldman, entrepreneur, author, podcaster, and veteran web designer. Jeffrey was the founder of A List Apart magazine, the co-founder of A Book Apart, and the design conference and event apart. Welcome, Jeffrey.
Hi.
Here is Aaron Gustafson. Aaron is currently web standards and accessibility advocate at Microsoft. He's also the author of the book Adaptive Web Design, as well as numerous articles which can be found both on and offline. In the past, Aaron ran his web development consultancy Easy Designs based in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and managed the Web Standards Project. And last but not least, Aaron just coincidentally happened to be the author of a brand new course on Aquent Gymnasium called Modern Web Design, and that is a complete coincidence, of course. How are you, Aaron?
Not too bad.
Our goal, gentlemen, is to have a chat around this topic of design is hard and the state of learning and web education. And I know there's a lot of ways we could kind of kick this off. Maybe I'll start with you, Jeffrey, because I feel like you've been in the industry for a while, and
I've been designing websites for 20 years, and I'm scared of web design. So I'm really glad you're having this panel because it's very daunting right now. It seems incredibly daunting to well, I don't know what it feels like to beginners, but I think if you've been doing this for a while, it's like we don't quite recognize our own country, if that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm. Well, you mean, let's talk about that a little bit. So you coded, obviously, from the beginning of coding, really, for the web, and you kind of dipped into other ventures, and now you've returned back to coding. Is that an accurate statement? Is that?
I've returned to design.
Okay.
I wouldn't hire. I mean, to me, every designer should also be a front-end coder.
Okay.
But I wouldn't hire me as a front-end coder. I've written books about how to do it, but I wouldn't hire me today. I think one of the things that's so daunting is this plethora of tools. And I don't know that everyone needs to know and master every tool, but we feel like we do. So I think one of the things that maybe a course like Aaron's or a discussion like this one could focus on is like, how do we evaluate which of these tools might actually benefit me and the people who use the website, right? Even more importantly, and how do I go about evaluating which of these frameworks I need to know, or which of these new web technologies going the other direction I need to know.
I mean, Aaron, I'm sure you can appreciate this in that there's so much happening now that it's very hard for one person to kind of keep track of everything, right? So the latest stuff in CSS3, the latest Flexbox developments, the latest browser developments.
Grid layout.
How does where do you draw the line? How do you just, how do you do it? How do you draw the line?
I mean, I think, and I've actually I've been thinking about this for a long time. I've got a draft post that's probably been sitting there for, 2 years now that I've been like trying to put together how I'm managing this stuff. But a lot of it comes down to just like any problem. I view upgrading my skills as a problem that needs a solution, and any complex problem like this needs to be broken down into simpler problems that are easier to solve. So on every project that I do, I pick anywhere from 1 to 3 new things to try out and see how I like. So a couple of years ago that may have been, okay, let me dip my toes into the world of SaaS. Let me dip my toes into the world of doing task runners like Grunt and Gulp and stuff like that, and then slowly but surely build up a knowledge base of this stuff. So at this point I've done a couple of projects that have used like Service Worker, and that's not even a final spec really yet, but I've done a couple done a couple service workers at this point, and I find that really interesting. And I've kind of evolved the way that I approach task runners. I moved from grunt to gulp and started kind of evolving my process there. And it's all, I'm a big fan of, well, I took Latin when I was growing up, and there's the great Ovid quote, "Dripping hollows out the rock," and that's the way I feel. You gotta start small, and eventually it makes a big impact. But you have to take it piecemeal. You can't just open the fire hose and just assume that you're going to be able to handle it all. Don't overwhelm yourself, because it's gonna make it a turnoff. It's not going to make web design fun, and I need it to be fun.
So you have a smart approach. I think it is overwhelming for newcomers, and I think it's overwhelming for old-timers. The very thing you're talking about, I look at this stuff and go grunt and gulp, and it's like lions and tigers and bears, oh my. And I'm fortunate that I work with people who know that stuff much better than me, and I hand it off to them. But it does make me feel a little bit like more like a customer and less like a designer, if you know what I'm saying, to not know these things. But I love what you're saying, because it's like a piece at a time.
What about the role of the client? In other words, if you're a student of web design, or if you're learning web design, so we have folks who are in production already, and they probably know what it means to work with a client. But if you're a young designer who's learning the ropes, how do you simulate that? Because to me, I feel like, sure, there's lots of difficulty understanding code and understanding the fundamentals of design, but is there a way to tackle that? Like, how do we simulate that? Or can we?
Well, if you're at a school, it depends where you're learning. If you're learning on the job, you don't have to simulate it because your client's there.
Right.
And your boss, the person who hired you, is your client also. And your colleague, a senior developer that you're working with, is also your client. Like, everybody who's more experienced than you is your client, and everybody who's less experienced than you, but you need their input. The content person is your client. Everybody's your client. So there's that. If you're doing it at a school, then your teacher is your client, and your fellow students are clients, and you take turns, just like you would if you were preparing a speech. I'll read you mine, and you read me yours.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, I think that one of the things that you did, I thought was really interesting, again, years ago, was you kind of documented your process in real time. So you might talk about, like, oh, this is what I'm learning today, and I feel like, is this something that's getting lost? Are we losing, the person who, the developer designer who's sharing what they're doing with the world? Like, how important is that?
There's still, you're looking at people who do that. There's lots of people out there who do that, right? There's people who make a shim so that a form of CSS will work in an older browser that doesn't support it yet, and they say, this is an experiment we tried. Or, Eric Meyer, my partner on Event Apart, is writing a little article right now on some advanced CSS he just used. Not that advanced when you read it, because it's Eric Meyer, so he makes it seem like it's child's play. He makes it seem you could be a non-developer and read it and get it. But I think there's lots of people out there, young people, new people, tons of people sharing what they're learning. I think that's one of the exciting things about web design as opposed to any other field I've ever been in. There's not so much secretive. People aren't afraid of looking like idiots in our field, even though they're professional and they charge a lot of money. They're not afraid of saying, I tried for 6 months to, we had remember the Holy Grail? We had years where people were just trying to put a header, a footer, and a couple of flexible columns on the layout, and it eluded us in terms of what CSS was capable of doing and what CSS in browsers was capable of doing, and people were just like, folks, I think I might have figured out something that kind of works. You just can't use italics, or you can't put an image in the middle of the column or it'll break. But other than that, if you just don't have any content, it's going to be great.
So, Jeffrey, I'm kind of curious to go back to that idea of, what was difficult, or what has been difficult for you as you kind of return to this world. You had mentioned there was a pain point the last time we spoke. I'm kind of just, I'm a little curious to hear you talk about that.
First, I'll tell a story. The first website I ever made, 1995, I had two partners. One of them was a very successful website, and one of the partners quickly became a creative director at a different company. A year later, I went to meet him because I was really excited about this new invention Microsoft was showing off. It was called CSS, and their IE3 browser could do things with it. And I was really, you could do like full screen type, right? There was so much you could do that you couldn't do with font tags. I was very excited, and I went to show it to him, and he had no idea what I was talking about because he'd been out of it for a year. Now think about how slowly things changed in the 90s. He'd been out of it for a year, and I was introducing a completely different way to do layouts, right? The way we should have had, but didn't have at the beginning, and he didn't get why that was amazing. Great guy, really a brilliant guy, and much more. I mean, I was the Luddite on that project, and he dragged me into the future, and then a year later, he didn't know why that was cool. Okay, so now I can answer your question. I've always been afraid of that happening, and I think it happened to me to some extent because there was a period at my old agency. I was doing strategic work for my conference. I was doing strategic work for my book publishing company. I was meeting clients and talking to designers, and I wasn't doing the work myself. And okay, and interestingly, you can get right back into graphic design. I mean, you may feel a little dated, like your old, last week's newspaper, but you can get right back into that, and you can figure out ways to, think about responsive and all that stuff, even, but coding, the CSS that I wrote in 2007, that was good. The HTML I wrote in 2007 is so different from, and I can look at HTML, like HTML5, good HTML5 markup. I see why it's good, and I know how to do things, and I know how to use a style guide. But still, for me now, writing something from scratch is a terrifying prospect, and I still want to do simple things that I fell in love with, like image and copy. I don't really want to create all these experiences with stuff floating and all this. I sound really old-fashioned, but I mean, and I think a lot of people who code that stuff don't actually know how to code it either. I think they're grabbing an off-the-shelf tool that by default says there's 3 columns and then there's 2 columns and then this floats and this moves, and they're like, great, I've got that effect and I've got this effect and that's perfect, and they're plugging stuff in, and it's almost like they're using an animated version of Dreamweaver. And I wouldn't want to attempt to code that stuff by hand. I'm not sure I like that stuff, period. So there's like lots of ways that it's daunting for me right now.
Right.
But I think Parallax is a good example of that.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, maybe even jQuery, right? I mean, I know a lot of developers who build stuff, and again, jQuery is kind of, but let's go back to your framework thing, right? So it's fairly trivial or straightforward to add references to some sort of JavaScript framework that'll do X, Y, and Z. But if you dig a little deeper, the question might be, do you really understand what's happening underneath?
Yeah.
I mean, there was always some mystery when we started, right? The first time I viewed source, I didn't know for sure what everything did. I had to figure it out. And early JavaScript, it's kind of the same where everything was an anchor link.
Yeah, those were the painful days.
Yeah.
So Molly Holzschlag has a great kind of analogy for this that I remember her telling me, gosh, years ago, probably over a decade ago now, which is, if you're driving your convertible through the desert really fast, and all of a sudden it stops, and you're out in the middle of the desert, and there's nobody around, and you don't know how to fix your car, you're kind of screwed, because all you know how to do is drive the car. Whereas, if you know how cars work, you might be able to figure out how to fix the car in order to be able to get yourself out of the predicament that you're in. And so that was kind of always why, when she and I would talk about web education and stuff like that, and what was going on at that time, so like 2004, 2005, everybody was teaching Dreamweaver in schools, and I feel like, obviously Dreamweaver is not the de facto, tool that people teach now, but I feel like in a lot of ways we still teach tools. We don't teach underlying concepts. We don't teach you to understand what's going on under the hood. Because a lot of the stuff that jQuery and the other libraries were created to kind of fix, to kind of fill the gaps and make browsers play well together and all that sort of stuff, that stuff's been taken care of for years now. Obviously a lot of people like jQuery because I can pick an element by saying, here's the CSS selector for it, right? So I understand CSS selectors, I can go ahead and find this element. Query select for all, which is the standards way of doing that in plain vanilla JavaScript, has been around since IE8. Like we've had this for friggin' ever, and there are a lot of things like that. I mean, we've had cross-browser AJAX since 2009. A lot of these different APIs.
I would have thought even earlier.
Without having to use like the ActiveX version and kind of having the different steps for the browsers to have the consistent API. I think it was 2009. It may have been 2007 even. Yeah.
What you mean, like standards-based, writing the same code?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. We've had AJAX forever, but yes, standards-based AJAX.
Yeah, I mean, since Outlook Web Access back in, I don't even remember when that was, 2002, 2003, somewhere in there. But yeah, a lot of these APIs that we rely on a library for, they're in there. I mean, even something as simple as like people like jQuery for adding and removing class names or to see if an element has a class and stuff like that. And there's the class list API, which has been around since 2013 interoperably, I think, something like that. So I mean, these things, we don't need libraries as much anymore, unless you're doing something.
If you don't code it yourself, you're basically saying someone else's decision is good enough.
Yeah. Well, and I want an extra 30K of download in order to be able to do anything.
Well, and I think it's an interesting dilemma, right? So in some ways you can look at some of these things as crutches, right? You're using them to help you get something done quicker and faster. Of course, the problem with any crutch is you take it away and what's going to happen. So which kind of leads us to, again, like this question of, all right, so we know that this field is very complicated, it's tough, it's overwhelming. Maybe this leads us right to standards, right? Aren't those going to help us? Don't all browsers render stuff the same these days? What does that do? What's that look like? Was that a part of that pain that you were talking about, Jeffrey, at all? Did you? I know that.
No, that's not a part of the pain at all. Okay. No, I mean, the latest things aren't universally supported yet. You have to turn on a flag in some browsers, and other browsers don't support them at all. But that's okay because you can learn in the browsers that support them. I saw Rachel Andrew gives a great talk about, oh my gosh.
CSS grids.
Yes,
right?
Thank you.
Yeah.
And she says, like, people say, oh, I can't use it yet. And it's like, exactly, that's great. So now you can master it. Mm-hmm. Use the browsers that support it, turn on the flags, test it, and then use it for prototyping instead of Bootstrap. Teach yourself something new. And then when it's finally supported across the board in like another year, you hit the ground running. You're the person who knows how to do all that. I get very excited about grid layout and Flexbox. I feel like if you missed a bunch of, all right, let's say that you had stopped doing front-end code 5 years ago. Basically what you missed were a whole bunch of hacks, right? Oh, this thing doesn't work in this browser because of this well-known bug. So what you do there, you just have to put a comment, an empty comment here. Oh, you just got to close up all the white space. Why? Well, it's going to render all the white space. I mean, that's basically what we were learning was all these things to do that were voodoo, right? Yeah. Just put a chicken bone in it, and you have to kill a small animal in the light of the full moon, and then it'll work. And that's standards, right? And that wasn't really standards. That was the compromised, we're close enough to use this stuff with these hacks, so let's do it. And I think now, also I think really floats are a hack. We've been doing layouts for years with a CSS that was not designed to do layouts. Like the idea that people had was, we're going to give our documents style. It was like a Microsoft Word, right? And not Microsoft Word as like a publishing tool, like prototyping a magazine layout, but Microsoft Word as like your kid's term paper, right? Or, I'd like to use Helvetica, but I'd like my subheads to be blue. It was like, that's what it was. It came from that universe. Brilliant people created it, but they were not graphic designers, right? And so now we finally have CSS that's actually designed for layouts. I mean, I kind of envy the people who start learning how to do this stuff 3 years from now. Because they're going to start with tools that are designed for the jobs they do. Right? A scripting language, a markup language, and a styling language that are really designed for the jobs they do. And they won't have to they won't have all the confusion that someone like me has, because I'm, the older you get, the more things you have to remember. I'm going like, font face, no, that's not it. I have to actually like spool the tape backwards and forwards to.
Well, and we have to unlearn some stuff too.
Tons.
So, yeah, it is a really tricky balancing act. There are some things that it kind of feels like are necessary though. So, for example, when I came down to Chattanooga, whenever it was ago, we were developing the course, and I remember you, Aaron, mentioned something about like, what will we do without GitHub, right? And so I kind of feel like, okay, so is that something in someone's arsenal? Should that be in every single designer's arsenal? Do you need to understand how to use GitHub, for example? Can you call yourself a front-end developer if you don't know how to use it?
I mean, I think you can. It depends. It depends on what your goals are and the sort of work that you're doing. And I think having some understanding of version control is probably a useful skill to have. Whether that's GitHub or whether that's, there are a bunch of other ones, Beanstalk and Spring Loops and stuff like that offer similar services, whether it's Subversion or whether it's Git or what have you. Understanding that, and I also think there are certainly fundamentals to using a tool like Git and to knowing the command line. But if you're fearful of the command line, then there's tools that are out there for you. Or if you're a hand coder like I am, and you like using Visual Studio Code or what have you, or Sublime, there are plugins that allow you to connect with Git and manage Git stuff from within there, and you never have to look at the command line. And so it's all about exposing yourself and then figuring out what works for you in terms of running this stuff. They're just like with the world of task runners, grunt, gulp, all that sort of stuff. There are tools out there that will put a GUI on that for you too. And if you're not a command line person, then there's tooling that's out there that can enable you to take advantage of those things without kind of treading over that line of comfort into discomfort for you. So I think there certainly, you're going to be able to find more work if you know how to do Git, but you don't have to learn Git in a weekend. You can learn how to push and pull. You could just clone a repo and just see how that goes, and then just start playing around with it a little bit. And again, it's not like you learn Git in, like I said, in a weekend. It's the very same process. Pick one thing at a time. You're not going to jump immediately in and start doing like octopus merges and stuff like that. You may not even get
issues.
Yeah.
Just start with issues. Issues, for anyone who doesn't know, it's just bug tracking or things that need to get done. Instead of the usual thing where management comes around and says, this is messed up, fix that, and nobody remembers what they said and nobody has marching orders. Instead, very systematically go through, identify a feature that needs to be added or fixed, mark it as a bug or as a nice to have, something that's urgently needed or not, assign it to a person or to yourself. And so it's basically a way of doing critique and improvements bit by bit. It's a to-do, it's a task manager, like in the literal sense, not a task runner, but it's really good, and anybody can learn that. We have a lot of non-technical people using Git in various projects so on, and they get everyone gets it. That's a nice way to get comfortable with the look and feel of it, at least on GitHub.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah,
Well,
and you can do the same thing even with just text files. Just write a letter or an email to your friend as a text file and check that into your own GitHub repository and just kind of figure out the process of making changes and getting those in there and that sort of stuff. And that's, yeah.
Well, I would say another thing that that probably should be in people's toolbox. The 800-pound gorilla in the room, of course, is mobile, right? I mean, these days, again, I would kind of pose the same question. If you call yourself a web designer or web developer in the year 2016, are you designing mobile first, right? I think you should be.
Yeah, I don't know, Jeff. We all three of us have been around for so long on the web that it's kind of amusing to me to sit back and look at how this industry, like every other industry, is so cyclical. All of the challenges that we have now with responsive design, with performance optimization for mobile and stuff like that, we were doing that back when we were dealing with a 14.4 modem, and we were trying to compress the heck out of our images, and we got, especially within our industry, got spoiled by fast internet connections and high power computers and all that sort of stuff, and really started resting on our laurels, which is why the average web page is 1.5 meg now or something like that.
We rested on our assumptions.
Yeah. Yeah, we got comfortable on the bubble.
Back in 1996 or 97, Glenn Davis, who was a co-founder of the Web Standards Project and who ran Project Cool Site of the Day, he proposed 3 kinds of web layouts: Jello, liquid, Jello, and ice. And ice was basically a fixed width layout, which is what became the default. Jello was basically adaptive layout. It was a layout that worked here, but it would also work there. Right? You assumed there were 2 or 3 monitor shapes and sizes, and you accommodated those. And then liquid was, let's call it a really ugly, primitive, but absolute forebear of responsive design. Right? And when John Alsop wrote the Tao of Web Design and was talking about, let's accommodate the web, let design be webby, he was talking about liquid design.
Yep.
The problem was liquid design was kind of ugly because there weren't enough controls in place to do layouty things and art directory things and brand things.
Or even just line length optimizations.
Yes, right.
Made reading really challenging.
Even right. So I can remember doing them and then having someone on a big monitor going, I can't read this, and I was like, you're right.
The old W3C site was awful for that. It just kept spreading and spreading and spreading.
So you'd have guilt if you did a fixed width layout because that's wrong, but you'd have guilt if you did a liquid. Responsive was finally we have the tools that will allow us to take what was good about this and what was good about that. So you're right, everything's cyclical, and I think the reason you brought it up is in direct response to Jeremy's question, about mobile first, because years ago we were saying content first, right?
Yep.
Years ago we were saying, I'm not going to design if I don't know what the content is. I don't know what the interaction is, I don't know who the user is, I don't know what the content is. I'm not a decorator.
Yeah.
You don't hire me to say, I'd like it beige with a light blue undertone. Someone will do that. There are people who do that. 99 designs for $1 or whatever. There are people who do that, and there's some, if you have no graphic design skill and you have a company you need to launch and you just want a pretty shell, then it's a good, that's fine and it gives some employment to somebody, but design is problem solving, and you're not going to get it that way. And so we do, I think mobile is the 800-pound gorilla, but I also don't know what mobile is at this point.
Yeah.
Everything's mobile. My desktop machine that's connected to a wire is not mobile. I'm not going to take my 27-inch monitor down the street to a meeting with the client. But is my laptop mobile? And where do you, on the other end of that, watches, drum pants, wearables. I had students, I teach in the interaction design program at School of Visual Arts in New York, and a couple of years ago I had a student that made a project that would basically warm up as your loved one came near you. So the example was she's sitting in the coffee shop in Brooklyn having left work in Manhattan,
and la-di-da, 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 and all of a sudden her wrist warms up and she looks out the window and there's her boyfriend coming up the street. Because it was a proximity sensor, it was geolocation, and the internet, and that stuff happens over the web too. And so I think it's this vast continuum that we have to be, it's definitely not just visual design, but I think it's just design. When we say mobile or desktop or anything else, I think it's almost like, I don't even know what to call it, so I call it design.
Yeah,
so, Jeffrey, just one thing. Can you give me your source for the web-enabled drum pants? Because I need a pair of
drum
those.
pants. Ask Josh Clark.
Okay.
Josh Clark or just Google drum pants. It's a product. It's a product.
Oh, is it? Is that
This is cyclical because Laurie Anderson had drum pants in 1980. I don't want to say how long ago, but I remember going to her concert, and she was like drumming on her suit. She basically had sensors connected to computers that had little digital samples, probably like 8-bit samples that sounded really grungy, which sounded really cool and techy back then, right, and futuristic back then, like Tron graphics. It's futuristic back then. But, so now they're real. And you can drum while you're
online.
Sitting on the unemployment line, you can drum on your drum pants.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I think what, like Jeffrey is talking about, what is mobile, what is the continuum that we're designing for now, and what starts to get me really excited is looking at where things are going with purely voice-based interactions, so no visuals whatsoever. So whether you're talking to Siri or Cortana or Alexa or any of these digital assistants, we have to be thinking about what is the cognitive overhead of working with a particular interface. And so all of the things that we learned from Luke Wroblewski and others in terms of the mobile first stuff and focusing on the core task that needs to be accomplished in a given interface and getting rid of the noise in favor of the signal, all that becomes even more important as we move into a world where we don't have a screen, where we're just having a conversation with some disembodied voice that's doing stuff for us. And so that's, that might be somewhat terrifying to designers, but it's also incredibly empowering if you think about it, because when you start to tie that stuff together and tie that into a lot of the real-time translation engines that are available now, all of a sudden you open up the largely English-centric web to people in other countries and in other languages and such, and create more opportunities for them to access this huge body of knowledge that we've managed to amass on the web and enable them to participate in modern society, which largely happens on the internet.
I want HAL 9000 from 2001. I want that to be the voice. I'm sorry, I can't do that, Dave. And I want a web standard that basically has voice parameters that you can then synthesize, so you can basically say voice, how.
Yeah, we had oral style sheets. They were a proposal years ago.
Yeah.
Implemented them. I'm not quite sure, but I wouldn't be surprised if they come back in some form or another, because being able to change voices, being able to have a certain section of your page read out by, you had controls that was like middle-aged female, like middle-aged U.S. female or something like that, and like young child, and all these sorts of things, and very few people implemented them. I want to say
there was probably a fetish news group for that too back in the day.
Probably. I think there were some tools, maybe ReadSpeaker and a couple of other ones that would do audio transcriptions of your site that I think did pay attention to oral style sheets, but and that's AURAL, not ORAL.
Which is a whole other thing.
Yes, I think something like that's going to come back. I gotta believe that it will, because we're starting to get more voice enabled. Everything's cyclical. If you look back to the very early days of the web, we had, VRML for virtual reality on the web, and now we have WebVR, which is, it's the new thing, but in a lot of ways it's going back to that idea of trying to move virtual reality online.
Remember when Yahoo had a language? Yahoo and Apple collaborated, or it was a 3D language, so you could do a search instead of doing a fast text-based search, which Google would then own the universe by doing. They came up with a really slow, especially over a 14.4 modem, really slow, like three-dimensional search where you'd sort of navigate through. Do you remember this? What was it called?
It sounds
It wasn't
familiar.
called ICE. It was like hot sauce. Hot sauce.
Sounds
It
familiar.
was a three-dimensional. It was a language of three-dimensional search, which nobody wanted to. Like, it was like, I'm getting attacked. I need the police. Oh, I'll just do this 4-hour-long three-dimensional search for the phone number. No, everything's an emergency on the internet. I want to get it as fast as I can. That was the problem.
So, gentlemen, we're going to be taking questions shortly, but I do want to ask kind of one thing of you both. So, you both have been in positions where you're looking for jobs, but you've also been in positions where you are maybe looking to hire someone, specifically a front-end developer or a coder. And I'm curious to know, for those folks out there, or just for anyone in general, what sort of things in general or specific do you look for in someone who might be looking for a job as a front-end developer? Like, what are the attributes that you're interested in?
I guess, when I was running my agency, a lot of the interviews that we did, we mainly looked for interest and enthusiasm for the medium. Somebody who actually, really, they weren't doing it just for a paycheck. They were doing it because there was something that spoke to them about working on the web, and they were excited to learn new things. Obviously, fluency with HTML, CSS, JavaScript, those things were important, but I had no expectations that they were going to have the entire JavaScript, the definitive guide memorized, and would be able to just write programs from scratch or what have you. I think that's kind of, I don't know, I don't think that's necessary. There are so many resources out there to be like, I want to do this, what do I need to do? And I'd much rather have somebody that has a fluency with that and that knows the questions to ask in order to get to the thing that they need to implement in order to accomplish something, but that's just really passionate about the work that they're doing and that's super interested in doing things because they're gonna push themselves further. They're gonna learn more. They're going to get better and better over time. And I think that's a really key thing to have for somebody that you're working with. And obviously, good team player is a huge thing as well because you want to have somebody that's there to support everybody else in the group as well.
Uh-huh. Excellent. Okay, Jeffrey, what
Those
are
are great. I agree with all those things. I also think so. If somebody's a newcomer or a student or young, new to the field, they don't have to be young in age, but new to the field. I look for excitement, enthusiasm, just like that. Because when I was teaching myself this stuff, I thought it was the coolest stuff in the world, and I would dream in 16-color GIFs. Right? I would actually dream. I would see a sign, and I would say, "How would I render that?" I would always be thinking. I was boring as hell. My girlfriend couldn't stand me, but I was obsessed with learning all that, and so I look for that. I look for someone who's passionate about these things and has ideas. And then if they're a little more experienced, I look for contributions. Have they given something to the community in some fashion? Do they write? They don't have to be the greatest writer on earth, but do they blog? And if so, what about? Are they repeating what other people say, or do they have ideas? Do they contribute to a group blog? Have they made something for other people? Have they done? I work with a guy, Roland Dubois. We weren't even working together at the time, but I said, I want to really try. I have this idea for a design I'm doing, and I want to try tilting the type. And I know you can do that in CSS now, but I don't know if it's readable. He went and made a JS fiddle to just test it, and he said, well, here's what it looks like. And he had little variations to show me, and I was like, we're not even working together. And this is, by the way, it's an experienced guy, right? That's not a beginner, but that wasn't his project at the time, and he dove in because he was passionate about it. And now we work together. Like, I look at that and go, that's who I want to work with. Someone who's more fired up about this than I am, right? And I'm pretty excited about it.
So it sounds like enthusiasm, for those folks out there, enthusiasm way up on the top of the list, and also to show something cool that you've done. So that we know that you're telling the truth.
And if you haven't done anything cool, we have a contest for that.
That's true. Yeah, we should totally do that before we jump to questions. There is a cool contest called called 10K Apart. Aaron, can you just talk quickly about that before I forget it?
Sure. So, as I mentioned earlier, the current average web page is like 1.5 meg or something like that. And so we decided to bring back a contest that Microsoft and an event apart have done in the past, which is to build a web experience in 10K or less. So we changed it a little bit this year. We're actually saying 10K per page load for like the initial page load of your HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And to build something cool in it. And I think we're up to almost 6 dozen entries or something like that. It's some ridiculously high number, and they've been amazing. And the contest's open to pretty much anyone. There are some minor restrictions in the legal copy, but there have been some great entries from all over the world, and people have until the end of the month. I think the 30th of September is.
And what's that URL?
a-k-apart.com. You can find out all of the details, and you can use the contact form, and I will probably be the one answering you to give you recommendations and suggestions. I've actually been using it as an opportunity to help people better come to grips with progressive enhancement and stuff like that as well. If something comes in and I'm like, oh, you could tweak this and make it more accessible, or have you thought about doing this? So it's kind of been a fun mentoring exercise for me as well.
Always teaching. You're always teaching.
And also that website that you just mentioned itself is actually an example of a site that is less than 10K, right?
Yep, and it does balloon up to 200K roughly on some of the large gallery pages, but that's only if you have JavaScript available, and then we lazy load in the appropriate images and all that sort of stuff. But I've actually been writing writing the 6th entry, I think now, that kind of covers the whole build process and how we managed to squeeze everything into a 10K initial load. So it's been kind of interesting to go back and dissect that stuff.
Where are you publishing those?
Those are all on the Microsoft Edge developer blog, which I'll drop the link in here for everyone.
Cool. Well, let's switch gears a little bit and take some questions. Again, we've got tons and tons of them. There's no way we're going to get to all of these, obviously, in 10 minutes. But the good news is some of them are kind of close duplicates to each other. So here's one from Reme, who says, what are your thoughts about frameworks, Bootstrap, Foundation, etc.? When should web designers reach for them?
Of course you go to me first. So, sorry, I was typing that URL in. My feeling on frameworks is that I think that they can be really useful in certain scenarios. I think that they're extremely useful for quickly prototyping an idea and just seeing if it has legs. Because then you're not spending a bunch of time writing CSS that you're going to throw away and so on and so forth, or JavaScript you're going to potentially throw away. And so they're really good in those scenarios. They're also really good for learning from, to see how people have solved certain problems. But I am very reluctant to just build a site in Bootstrap and just push the whole thing out there. I think there's a lot of great thought that's been put into Bootstrap, Foundation, all of these different frameworks that are kind of a mishmash of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. But I don't necessarily feel that the problems that the framework was designed to solve, they aren't necessarily the same problems that you're looking to solve, so they may not be the right solution. And then you also run into the problem that most people who use these frameworks don't go back and pare them down to only the pieces that they actually need. And so you end up, and I actually talked about this in the piece that I wrote about the 10K Apart site, talking about just jQuery. How many people just, automatically when they create a new template, they include jQuery. So that's, roughly a 30K download for people, and they may use it to do one thing. That one thing probably could have been accomplished in vanilla JavaScript in a lot less than 30K, and the user would have a better experience overall. So I think de facto going to a framework for every project that you're starting is doing your customers, your end users, a disservice. I think, I sound like a broken record a lot when I'm at conferences talking about this stuff, but I feel like we make a lot of decisions as web designers and developers where we choose tools and frameworks and stuff that make our jobs easier, but then our users end up paying the cost for that. And I don't think that's right. I think that we should absorb that pain in order to make their lives better.
That's a fantastic point. I totally agree.
He nailed it.
So here's another one. This one is very provocative, and so I'm going to throw this to Jeffrey because I'm fascinated to hear his response. So here's the question from David. Now that so much web traffic has migrated to the mobile web, with all the restrictions that this brings to the presentation of content, is a background in graphic design really as valuable as it was in the past when you're just stacking rounded corner boxes on top of each other? So to simplify, is a background in graphic design really as valuable as it was in the past? Yeah.
Sure, and a background in sciences is just as valuable. A background in some of the best designers I've worked with had a majored in philosophy. Whatever it was that you studied, that you're passionate about, that you bring to web design, right? Just like, you know, you're a better web designer if you're a web designer who does stuff for NGOs, let's say, because you're passionate about social causes, or you do stuff about your church because you're passionate about your faith. Whatever it happens to be, if you have that other passion that fuels what you do, the things meld. You don't have to be a graphic designer to be a good web designer, right? You don't have to have that background, but it certainly helps in terms like decisions about typography and in fact, I would say the smaller the screen, the fewer things, the fewer distractions, the more, dare I say, mastery of graphic design makes a difference between a really effective little app that seemingly wasn't even designed and another one that's kind of not that much fun to use, or there's just something off about it. Like a really great graphic designer knows what to remove and keep removing and keep removing, and will make, maybe there'll be 2 sizes of type because that's all the hierarchy that's needed, as opposed to someone who's playing and using lots of sizes. So I think the discipline and skill that comes with a graphic design background are very valuable, and they're as valuable as they ever were, maybe more so because, again, the less screen you have to play with, the better you better use that screen. At the same, and the less you're relying on buttons and nav bars, and the more you're relying on people understanding that they can touch something, the more you have to really understand how design works, right? Because if I don't know anything about design, but I know that I put a big left and a big right button, right, for like next, and I write the word next, I can kind of get away with having a crummy user interface because, I mean, if you go to like Huffington Post or any of these websites where they have like you won't believe these celebrity divorces, you go there and it's just a whole bunch of ads, and then there's a little pop-up window with deceptive anti-user patterns everywhere. But basically there's an ugly little left arrow and an ugly little right arrow. When you figure that out, you can navigate to the next image. But that doesn't take a great graphic designer to do that. But making something that works on a tiny phone screen takes a pretty good one. So I would say you can be a great designer without that, but graphic design is certainly not devalued in today's, you know, it's like saying, well, if we're only printing in black and white, I guess I don't really need to understand design. Yeah, you do. Yeah, you do. Maybe more so than if you have a whole color. I mean, we got away with murder 5-10 years ago. If I was like, I'm going to make a burlap texture and a little drop shadow, lots of people could pretend to be designers because anybody could make something look pretty good if you were a little bit restrained, but you had some tricks of the trade. Right? I'm going to make a drop shadow and then this angle, and I'm going to use, oh yeah, this curve that everyone's using. You could make it look like you knew what you were doing, and there's a lot of sameness. Oh, and that reminds me, one other thing I would say that Aaron didn't get to when he was talking about the drawbacks of frameworks is they have a certain de facto look and feel, and that's become the de facto look and feel of the web. And so people are all making sites that look the same, and it's really boring right now. And they're not necessarily saying to themselves, how does this content want to be represented? What will make the most, you know, memorable and brand appropriate impression? No, they're saying, okay, I've got a big picture up here, they're probably animated, then I got 2 things here, and then I got 3 columns here, done. And oh yeah, and it's responsive. All right, I'm done. Without thinking. And I think, you know, a graphic design background can help you there too. You don't need it. There are plenty of other great backgrounds, but I think it can help.
Yeah. No, I would completely agree with that, and I think that's one of the things that really kind of irks me about the startup world is like every site's a Bootstrap site, and you can tell immediately when you go to it, oh, this is yet another Bootstrap site. I mean, I think that if you don't come from a graphic design background, like I didn't come from a graphic design background, there are some great books out there that can give you at least a sense of I like Ellen Lupton's Thinking with Type is a really accessible introduction to typography, and you don't have to jump into Bringhurst or something like that and get into the super nitty gritty of it, but you can start to understand things like that, or start to understand things like proximity and contrast and some of those other tools that are really useful. And as you mentioned, Jeffrey, it become even more important as you get into a smaller screen where there's the potential to create too much distraction or to draw your eye away, or you go to a site and like the margins are huge on your tiny screen, so you end up with basically like 12 characters across or something like that. And understanding how those very fundamental bits of graphic design knowledge work can help you to do a really good job in those areas.
I'd also say look everywhere for inspiration. Look at all communication. Listen to music. Read books. How is the author letting you know what the character thinks, even though they haven't said what the character thinks? How is the film director letting you know that this character's lying or in trouble? The actor's doing it, the director's doing it, the screenwriter did it. How are they doing that? Go to a museum, go get an art book. Look at art. How does it communicate? How does this picture make you? Why does this picture make you feel sad? Bring that to your design.
Agreed. Very well said. So we got one more, and this one is kind of a combination of a couple, and this one is kind of semi-related, but maybe completely different. So here's a question: do you find that there's much gender or age bias in web design, especially if you're new to the field? I'm a 55-year-old woman who spends all my free time online learning, researching the latest and best design practices and examples. So yeah, I mean, gender age bias, it exists, but to what degree? What can we talk about that for a second?
It's definitely out there. Some places worse than others, and there are also places that are really into age less so, but there's lots of places now that are into empowering women, run by women, started by women. Don't have to be. There are lots of men that want to hire women too, but that's not the point. Find the places that don't have that bias. Don't necessarily take a job where you're going to be treated as a glorified secretary or whatever because of somebody's sexist baloney. I'm watching my language here because I don't know what the rules are about swearing, but yeah, don't let that get you down. Age is another thing, and that's through our whole society. My brother's girlfriend is an accountant. She's very good, but she's approaching 60, and they'd rather hire two 30-year-olds. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
As people get older, I can remember when I was first in advertising seeing like these middle-aged people who had just lost their jobs because there was a merger and they fired half the clients fired us because of conflicts. I saw these people walking away who were going to go nowhere. They're 40 and they'd been doing this mediocre advertising at this agency to satisfy the clients, and now they were never going to get another job. It's very scary. But if you're passionate about what you're doing and you're willing to reinvent yourself, don't let anybody keep you down. And go to meetups. There's lots of girl development. There's lots of meetups specifically for women coders and designers. Go to those things. Make contacts with those things. You'll get lots of referrals. There's companies like Etsy. They're very aggressively don't want to be a tech company that's half men. They very aggressively look for women. They very aggressively make sure that that there isn't bias in the workplace. That that women don't have to feel like they're in some boy's locker room just to get their jobs done. There's companies like that, and they're talking about it. So find the companies that are talking about that stuff. That's where you want to work.
Yeah.
Someday that'll be true in every place, but right now it's not. So you don't want to work at some boys' club. They're out there, but you have lots of other options.
Yeah, I think you're going to find that larger companies tend to have less ageist bias and certainly less gender bias as well. I mean, I know Microsoft had a training that they did that was on just unconscious bias, and they actually took that, which was an internal training, and made that public so that anybody could actually go through that and learn about unconscious bias. And it's a phenomenal thing, but they're very concerned about having a diverse workforce, because diversity creates better products. When you don't have the same, everybody has the same background, the same experience, you end up creating very specific products that only work for that group. And so, when you have a diversity of opinions and a diversity of experience, that creates better products overall that are usable by a wider variety of people. So I think focusing on larger corporations is probably, at least at this point in the web space, is probably better than going after a startup. But yeah, it's.
I think what you just said too, that's a really good point, because diversity leads to better products.
Absolutely.
Said one of the three white men on the panel. Diversity leads to better products, and as a result, you can sell it like you sell accessibility by the self-interest of the company. If you tell a company this is the morally right thing to do, they're looking at the bottom line. It's not going to work. It might work with some people, but it doesn't work with a lot. But if you tell them our product will compete better, we will avoid a costly mistake. Right, the costly mistake that happens when you have to pull everything back because you've offended half the population because no one from that group was in the room when the very obviously offensive thing was said. Nobody had the right sensitivity. So you can if you're in a in terms of pushing managerial change, it's easy to do from that point. With that as a sales tool, as that as a selling point. Wow, language, words. It's been an hour.
It has been an hour. And so we have lots of awesome questions, but we need to wrap it up. And so before we do, let's just check back in with you folks, you guys, and anything on the horizon that you want to talk about, things that you're doing, presentations, books, anything. You got your time.
I'm going to Disney World. Not this weekend, but next weekend, with my kid. But I'm going for an event apart. We're doing a 3-day, 18-speaker blowout in Disney World at a Disney hotel on the Disney grounds, so you can learn all day and then go meet Mickey at night. So
nice. That
I'm excited about.
Excellent. Okay.
I'm excited about seeing just all these great entries that are coming in for the 10K apart contest. I'm excited to let the judges kind of dive in and start to hear their feedback and such. I think it's going to be really interesting.
Excellent. Well, we started to get a weird buzzing at the end there, so luckily we dodged. I think it's your mic, but maybe not. We dodged that bullet. So thanks everyone for joining. The last thing I will say, again, in addition to the 10K apart stuff, Aaron also is the author of our latest course, Modern Web Design, which is now live for the folks who are seeing this presentation. You're actually the first people to see it. So check that out, and if you want to learn a lot about things that we talked about here, and if you're curious to learn more stuff that isn't web development, go to Gymnasium for UX and GitHub and WordPress and Bootstrap. All those things are available there. And I want to thank everyone for taking some time out of their day to listen to us talk about all of these things. And gentlemen, thank you for taking the time as well.
Thanks, Jeremy. Thanks, Jeffrey. And thank you, everybody who's listening at home.
Thank you. A lot of fun. Let's do it again.
Indeed, we shall.
Okay.
Okay, we are now officially signing off. Take care.